So let's get into the nuts and bolts of significant figures. We call these sig figs sometimes, and remember that significant figures is really the same thing as digits. So we're looking at how many digits a number has, and the first thing we're going to do is learn how to count them, and then we'll see how to use them in calculations. So we need to be able to look at a number and count how many sig figs it has. So let me show you the definition first. In the definition, it's all digits known with certainty plus one that is estimated. The ones that are known with certainty are at the front, and then we have one that is estimated. That's the definition. So if we're given a number and we want to count how many sig figs, so this one had four significant figures. That one's pretty easy. But if we're given a number like this, counting it is a little more complicated because zeros are sometimes placeholders to show how big or small a number is, and they're not really measured. So anyway, let's look at how we figure that out. And first I need to tell you about different kinds of zeros. These in the front we call leading zeros that are in front of the non-zero part. These are ending zeros. And sometimes I'll call those, if there's any in there, I might call those sandwiched, okay? So let's look at our rules. So the leading zeros never count. And again, these are leading. Ending zeros count if the number shows, and you have to see it, in other words, when I say it shows a decimal point, I'm talking about it actually showing that dot there. If you see the dot, then the ending zeros count. So non-zero digits always count. So on this one, we're going to end up having, so non-zero and sandwiched count. So everything counts except for leading and ending if there's no decimal. There's a decimal in this one, so this one counts. So this number has 6 sig figs. Notice I put a line over the numbers to show that those digits are significant. So let's do some practice. Let's go through each one and identify the sig figs and give the reasoning. So these are all measured numbers that have one digit that is estimated, but we need to look and use our rules to count. So this one has leading zeros, those don't count. These are my non-zero, non-zero always count. And then the last rule, ending zero with the decimal place shown, it does count. Okay, so those are the significant figures there. This one doesn't have leading. The 4 and the 5 count, they're non-zero. Again, we have ending zeros and a decimal point shown, so those count. That has 4 sig figs. This number doesn't have leading or ending zeros, so all of this counts. Sandwiched zeros count. This number has ending zeros, but there's no dot shown. And this bugs some people because we all know that there's a decimal point there. We just didn't show it, but for the rule, ending zeros, you have to see the dot for them to count. So that one does not have, these ending zeros do not count. If I had written it like this, then it would mean that I had 4 sig figs instead. Okay, and then when a number is in scientific notation, all you do is you look at this front part and you apply the rules. So, so this one has 4, just like if it were 1.5. 280 without the times 10 to the 5th. Let's go back to our calculation and look at how we should be rounding that answer for the density. So remember, our calculator gave us this long number and so on. And to decide how many sig figs, when you multiply and divide, the rule is to look at the numbers that go into the calculation, these numbers, figure out how many sig figs they have, and then the one with the least determines how many sig figs should be in the answer. So in other words, this top one has 2 sig figs. The bottom one only has 1 sig fig. And so we're limited by this one with 1 sig fig. We can only have 1 here. So we're going to round it to 1. When you write answers in science, always be sure you check to have the right number of sig figs, but also that you write your units. When you add and subtract, there's a different rule. So that's one thing you really have to watch for when you're doing calculations in chemistry, is make sure that you're following the correct rule for the operation that you're doing. When you're adding and subtracting, you do not count sig figs. You look at how far they extend to the right relative to the decimal place. In other words, this one goes 2 past the decimal, and the bottom one goes, this goes 4 places past the decimal. But we're going to be limited by the top one. It's the one that goes least far to the right. So I'm going to cut it off right here. And then when I go to write my answer, I do look, I'm going to cut it off at this second past the decimal. I'm going to look to the right, and if that is 5 or greater, I'm going to round up. But that is not 5 or greater. Don't look beyond it to see if that would be rounded up. Don't round, just look. It's not 5, so I would put 1.24 grams. So those are the 2 rules. Multiply, divide. You're going to look for the number with the least sig figs and go by that. When you add and subtract, you're going to line them up, line up the decimal places, and cut them off by the one that goes least far to the right.